I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toil and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden shares? None but thee, dear Lord, none but thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. When my feeble life is o'er, time for me shall be no more. Guide me gently, safely o'er to thy kingdom shore, to thy shore. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. And when we all get to heaven, 603. Sing the wondrous love of Jesus. Sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, not a shadow, not a sigh. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Onward to the prize before us, soon his beauty will behold. Just the pearly gates will open, we shall tread the streets of gold. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory.
Test, test, test. Am I? All right. I can hear it now. I probably wasn't on a while ago. So, what verse stood out to you? What did you learn about God this week? What? He's consistent. Yes, he is. Yes. And no matter what, he still loves us. What? Excuse me. Yes, he is long-suffering. Yes, very patient. Yeah. Yes, he allowed women to inherit things. I mean, if you read through, especially even in the New Testament, Jesus gave women a very high ranking compared to the culture of that time. And it was even Paul, same way in his writings. They were both, how would you say it? They went against the norm on a lot of that stuff. Anything else? Well, when we left off last week, I hope, if I remember right, the spies had just come back with their report about the Promised Land. And they talked about how good it was and all of this. What did they leave out of their report? I mean, they talked about how good it was, and then the fact that the Nephilim lived there, and they felt like they were grasshoppers in their sight, and so forth. But they left out the 10 spies, not the 12, but the 10 spies left out one very important thing. You need a hint. What? Faith in God, yes. I started to say one very important person. They forgot about God. God had already, everything he did in Egypt, and basically brought Egypt, to their knees completely, destroyed their whole economic system through the plagues. And they were worried about this, these little cities. Compared to Egypt, those were nothing. And they forgot about God. So what was the consequence of listening to the 10? They didn't get to go. He told them to turn around, and nobody 20 years old or older, except for Joshua and his family and Caleb and his family, everyone else would die in the wilderness, and they would not get to see the Promised Land. And part of the thing that they were complaining about was they were worried about their kids being killed in battle and so forth, or taken captive. And yet it was their children that got to go to the Promised Land, and they didn't. So what happened the next day? Yeah, changed our mind. You were right. We should listen. We'll go do it now. And what happened to them? They got defeated very badly, yes. What can we learn from this? Listen to God in the first place, yes. Do what he calls you to do. And don't take matters in your own hands. I think both of those are very important. And all through the Bible, it talks about stories about people who took matters in their own hands and far-reaching consequences. I mean, everything that's going on in the Middle East right now is a direct result of Abraham and Sarah not waiting and not trusting God. So, yeah, we need to learn to, God says go and do it, and not try to do things in our own strength. What did Korah, Dathan, and Abiram do?
When they tried to turn the people against them, they round up, I remember the names, I'm trying to think which part of the story it was.
They were basically trying to take over, from Moses. They opposed Moses and tried to take over. Yep. And blamed Moses for killing a bunch of the Jews like Moses did it. You know, it was God that did it, but they blamed Moses. So what happened to Korah, Dathan, and Abiram? How? Yep, the earth opened up and swallowed them, and went directly live into the place of the dead, into the grave. And then there was a plague that broke out, and Aaron picked up his incense and ran between the people and stopped the plague from killing everybody. Why was that risky for Aaron? Well, probably not, but there's another reason. Who is he? High priest, and he had been anointed. And what was he not supposed to do? Something about death. He was definitely not supposed to touch any dead bodies. And he's running between people that are dying on this side and alive on this side. So it was very risky that somebody died, would fall into him, and then he would be under judgment too. Yeah. Okay. What happened to the waters at the waters of Meribah? Now, what happened? Tell me the story about the waters of Meribah.
Well, I guess it was their attitude when Moses and Aaron went to do what God told them to do to get water, but they didn't do it just the way he said.
Yep. He hit it twice. Now, I've heard people say that if he would have hit it just once, it wouldn't have mattered, but hitting it twice, I'm not sure that hitting it at all, it wasn't what God told him to do, because God told him to speak to the rock. And what was the result of that? Moses didn't, and neither did Aaron. Now, whether Aaron had any part to do with the actual striking of the rock, I don't know, but he was part of it. And in there, the one thing that kind of stood out to me, when Moses went and he struck the rock, he said something about but it was like, do we have to give you water again, or something along those lines. And in a sense, he's claiming that he was doing it, not God doing it. And I think that might have been part of it. I don't know. And Moses was held to a much higher standard than the rest of Israelites, right? Why? He was God's chosen. He got to speak to God face to face. And there's a verse that says, to whom much is given, much will be required. And I think that goes for all of us as Christians, especially as ones that many of you have been in church for a long, long time. Much is going to be required of you. Okay? Because you've heard the gospel, and you've heard preaching for some of you for years and years and years. And God's gonna expect more from you. So just so you know. What happened with the snakes? They were killing people. They were biting people, and people were dying. So what happened? Right. He had Moses make a bronze serpent, put it on a pole, stick it up in the middle of the camp, and anyone that got bit by a snake, all they had to do is look at that bronze serpent and they would live. Okay? Was there healing power in the bronze serpent? Trusting God. God said, this is how you show your faith. You just look at it. Yes, they ended up worshiping it. Yes, it was not good. Why did God send the snakes in the first place? Weed them out, huh? I think part of it was a test to allow them not only for God to because God knew who was going to believe and who wasn't, but to give them the encouragement when they got bit and they did what God told them to do and looked at the snake and they were healed. That allowed them, showing that faith would allow them to build on, or God to build on that faith, and they would show more faith later, hopefully. And I think God does that with us. He allows things to come into our lives, and He will tell us what we need to do, and it's whether or not we trust Him. And when we do trust Him, then we grow in our faith, and then He'll have something else, and we'll grow in our faith. And hopefully over the time period of our lives, we become more and more like Him and be able to trust Him more and more and more with everything that we do. If you look at Abraham, was the first thing God asked him to do is to sacrifice Isaac? No, that was way on down the road. He told him, first of all, go, and I'll show you where you're going. And he left, and he built on it. Everything that he did, all through his life, God was doing things and putting tests in front of him, and most of them Abraham didn't pass. That makes us feel a little bit better, right? When we fail God. But eventually, because of his growth and because he became more and more like Jesus, more like God, and learned, then he was able to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And remember, he just offered him. God didn't say sacrifice your son, but offer, and he did that. How is the snake a type of Jesus? Now, not kind, but typifies Jesus. Yeah, it was. That's part of it, yeah. What did they have to do? Look and believe, right? What do we do to get saved? We believe. And you know, we have to take the Bible at its word, and God says, whosoever believeth in me should not perish but have everlasting life, and we have to believe that. We have to trust that. And we have to put our faith in God's word. Just like they had to put their faith in God's word that said that if you look at the snake, you're going to live. So it is, all of these things tie together. They teach us more about who God is and more about Jesus. Even in the Old Testament, we see lots of things. And remember, type doesn't mean kind. It means that it typifies. It's like a model or an example of who Jesus is going to really be later. Just to give them a little idea about that. Did the serpent on the pole violate the second commandment? It was later, yes. Later it was. When they first did it, no, it was not. Because God told them to do that. And I think it was just something God allowed for them to. They weren't to worship the snake. They were just to look at it and believe that God would heal them. And they were worshiping God. Later, yes, it became a violation because they began to worship this snake.
When Paul and all the disciples were teaching, some of them, they tried to pray to them.
Right.
Because that was their vision, instead of realizing it was God.
Right. They tried to worship Paul and Silas, or, yeah, I think it was Silas at that point. And, yeah.
Do you think the serpents were a way that God brought about more or less getting rid of more of those that were under the age of 20?
It could have been.
Because like 24,000 of them.
Yes. Yeah. And we're talking about, probably 3 million people. And if you take over half of them were probably 20 years old and up. So there's a lot of people that died in that 20-year time period or the 40-year time period. And I think last week I said something wrong because when Moses was 40 was when he left and went into the desert. When he was around 80 was when he came back. So after this 40-year period wandering around, he'd been around 120. So I looked that up, so I'd make sure I said that. So tell me the story of Balaam. Yep. He could be greedy, yes. It calls him a prophet, right? Was he a prophet of God? He did say that. But he also used a lot of charms and different things to get his visions. I don't really think he was. I mean, I think God used him, but I think he was more like maybe one of the ones in Egypt, one of the magician kind of things, but at least he knew enough to know that he couldn't go against what God told him to do. So he went with them, and first you had the whole thing with the donkey, because the donkey was trying to keep him from being killed, and he kept beating the donkey until God opened his eyes, and then he's like, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I won't go. I'll just go on back." And God said, "No, it's all right for you to go, but say only what I'm gonna tell you to say." And then Balak took him at 3 different times, different places, to curse Israel. And what happened? He blessed them because God blessed them. And there's a verse at the second time that I hear the verse used a lot, and it's one of those things that it always, when I read it, I think, oh yeah, that's where that came from. But the very first thing he says in the second time, he says, God is not a man that he should lie, or son of man that he should change his mind. He's basically saying, Balak, God is not going to change his mind. He's not going to lie. He's going to bless them. And we hear that verse a lot, but it came from this story. And I always forget what story it comes from until I read it, and it's like, oh yeah. Yeah, don't know. God was probably protecting him. However, Balaam was killed when the Moabites attacked. Why? Do you remember? It tells you. Balaam. Now the quote prophet. This is why I don't really think he was a prophet of God, even though God used him and even though he listened and said all of those things. Yes. He encouraged the Moabite women especially to basically seduce whatever the Israelite men. And he said, I can't curse them. God won't let me curse them, but here's what you can do. You can go and you can start, persuading them to marry you and everything, and then you'll destroy them from within, basically. And I don't think a true prophet of God could have been able to do that. But that was what he did, and that's why he was killed. In Numbers 26, we have another census. Why did they have to do another census? Yeah, they lost a bunch of people, and they had to redo it again. And then we have where we talked about the daughters of Zelophehad, and how they got the inheritance, and God said, yes, that's a good thing. In fact, we're going to make that a law. He didn't give them all of the laws right at first. When things happen, he would say, oh yeah, you need to do this. So I think that shows us, again, I think too much all at once. Have you ever been to a conference or something when they did 2 months worth of lessons in 1 hour? And you're just like, oh, I can't handle all that. That's what would have happened if God went through and was trying to explain everything So he gave them a little bit at a time so they could grasp it, get it, understood it, apply it to their lives, and then go on. And how were vows? What were the difference between a man's vow and a woman's vow? A man's vow to God and a woman's vow to God. Yes. Right. Yes. Either husband or father had to not disagree with it. I won't say he had to approve, but he just didn't have to. He didn't disagree. If the day he heard of it, he didn't say, no, you can't do that, then it was binding. Yeah, just the first time he heard about it. It might be 2 or 3 days later, but the first time he heard about it, if he didn't say, no, we're not going to do that, then he was bound, and so was she. Now, the reason, and she kind of mentioned this in the podcast, but one of the main reasons is because most women didn't have any income of their own. And a lot of these vows would have to do with income. And if, a woman says, well, if this happens, I'll give you, $100. Well, the husband might say, no, you can't do that, because he's the one that did most of the breadwinning back then. So, yes, we can't afford that. And so that's why. And I think that was the biggest reason. It wasn't that women weren't allowed to make vows, and it wasn't that they were lesser citizens or anything that way. It was just that at that time period, most of them had no way to earn anything or no income. So it was just kind of to protect the woman as well as to protect the family, their income. Okay.
I think there was another issue worth mentioning, is the fact that when the women wanted, or not the women, when the half tribes wanted to stay on the
Yes.
other side of Jordan, that they was afraid it would cause conflict, to the point that they would be right back where they started from when they would not go in and fight.
Right.
And so that was a big issue at that time.
Yes.
I mean, they knew how to handle it eventually, but it was a concern.
Yes, it was. And we will see a little bit later even more of that, about the 2.5 tribes on the east side of the Jordan. Egypt, I'm going to do this backwards for y'all. Egypt is here. You got the Red Sea here. You got Israel here. They crossed, they went around this way, came across the Jordan, and actually entered from the east side into Jordan instead of coming from the west, which is Egypt. And it's always kind of confusing because they went around and came in from the other side. So that'll hopefully help you. All right? Oh.
The Lord was dividing the land
Mm-hmm.
for the people, and there was women in tent before him. The husband, their husband passed away.
Right.
And they were asking permission from God to have the land divided, hand it to them.
Yes.
And God did that. He did that, and he changed his laws after that.
Right. Yeah.
Women were taken care of.
Yes, he did. Yes. Yeah. After I said, I want to make sure I looked at the map right. Okay. Well, let's join hands and we will sing our dismissal chorus. And